Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. I am here with my co-host, JC.
Wendy Sellers, it's a pleasure to be back here. How are you this fine day?
Fantastic. You know, I can't complain. I can, but who's listening, right? Oh, that's right. Our listeners are listening. Hey, everybody, we're here today to talk about the need for training in this topsy-turvy current world. And just preparing for this podcast series today, JC and I were both saying, well, hey, some of the things we're going to be talking about might be irrelevant maybe next week because so many things are changing at a rapid pace in the HR land and then in the USA as a rule, right, JC?
Absolutely, Wendy. You know, just even very simply thinking about like the ADA, in late 2024, a coalition of 17 states filed a lawsuit challenging a rule by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Is that even going to keep moving forward? Is that out of the courts? That's still up for debate. And multiple rule phases out. And that's only talking about ADA. But there's so many things that are consistently changing right now. We really have to be on the balls of our feet.
Yeah, we really do. And speaking of the ADA, with Aurora, there is a training on the ADA specifically coming up. So folks, please go to the auroratrainingadvantage.com website and check out the upcoming trainings. There's one about essential job functions and insurance compliance and clarity within the ADA. And the ADA is a highly litigious rule or law, I should say, that not everybody understands. So I do want to talk about today in our first episode of 5, making sure that you are being compliant and being very clear about your job descriptions and making sure that your job descriptions are actually right. I'm an HR consultant and I see so many companies that they just pull a job description together and then they never update them for decades, if at all. And they'll decline a candidate or decline a request for accommodation under the ADA by a current employee because they're saying, the essential functions of the job are XYZ, and that's not what the ADA is saying, you have to work around. So folks, number one thing I want you to do after today is pull out all your job descriptions. And yes, it's time consuming. I understand. Pull out your job descriptions and look to see if you even have the words essential job functions on your job descriptions. There should be essential job functions and non-essential. I see all too often people just put all other duties as required. And that's not going to cut it with the ADA because they're going to say, well, no, that's not really how it works. Because if all other duties is lifting a 75-pound box and somebody has a temporary or a long-term or permanent disability and they cannot do that, you're not going to get away with saying, well, that's the essential function of the job. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Wendy, it does. And since 2015, the skill sets required for jobs, they've changed approximately 25% over time. And that transformation is expected to reach about 50% by 2027. That's a huge shift in essential job functions. So when we think about getting these written, we really want to be accurate with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, you have this wonderful thing called AI, and you can use things like ChatGPT or whatever other version of AI that you use to help you create job functions, or job descriptions. Just because you have a job description and AI helped you write it, or even if you bought a job descriptions, it doesn't mean that they are accurate because they have to be very, very specific for your industry all the way down to every single level in the organization. The Americans with Disability Act is very, very clear that you have to properly identify job functions to help meet the legal standards. So documentation is so important. The the two most important things in human resources land is documentation and communication of that documentation. Because a little tip here, I write handbooks. Nobody reads your handbook. Nobody reads okay, maybe 2 out of 100 employees might read it, and then they're going to be the ones that actually tell you what's right and wrong. But most people just read the job description when they're getting hired and they never look at it again. What I do in my space in HR consulting is I use the job description for everything. I use it to create interviews. I use it to create job ads. I use the job description to create every single interview question when we're either promoting internally or hiring externally. And then on top of that, what I also use the job description for is I turn it into a scorecard for reviews. And so job descriptions are very, very, very important, and they will get you out of trouble or get you in trouble on the other side with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So folks, the ADA is so very important, and job descriptions are required. Actually, I take that back. They're not required by law, but the first thing a lawyer will say when, somebody, an employee or a former employee goes to an employment lawyer and says, hey, my company discriminated against me. The first thing a lawyer asks any HR department is, give me the job description. And if you don't have one, again, you're not breaking the law, but it's going to be very hard to then defend some kind of case of discrimination,
Wendy,
particularly where the ADA is concerned.
Question for you. How do you balance accommodation and your business needs, thinking about accommodating the request without compromising job clarity?
Yeah, don't take it lightly. Now, if we're not talking about the ADA, you could definitely, weave your way in and out and saying, okay, well, the job's changed. We've got to update the job description. But if you completely change a job duty and you don't discuss that with an employee and you just, shove a new job description at them, or worse, you don't even have a job description and you just say, hey, effective tomorrow, the rules have changed. Your job duties change. Well, if that employee doesn't know that and they don't see it in writing and they don't have a chance to say, hey, HR or business owner, FYI, you may not have known because I never told you before, but I have a disability and I cannot do that job duty that you are now shoving at me. So let me step backwards. First of all, it is a misconception that employees do not have, and candidates and employees do not have to tell you that they have a disability. And so if they suddenly tomorrow show up and say, just so you know, I've had a disability my whole life, and HR says, well, you never told me that. Well, they don't have to tell you. They only have to tell you when they're requesting an accommodation or a change to their job. The job duty suddenly changed and they're saying, I need an accommodation. I need somebody to help me lift that heavy box or do something like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes sense and it doesn't, right? Because the fact that an employee or a candidate doesn't tell you about their disability, it's honestly, I'm going to just put it as bluntly as possible, it's none of your business unless it affects their actual job duties. So with that said, this is one of the reasons why you need training in this topsy-turvy current world, specifically revolving around the Americans with Disabilities Act. Next up, though, in episode 2 of this 5-episode series, we're going to talk about even more training topics. And I want to talk about something a little weird and awkward, which is managing off-duty conduct and employee discipline with off-duty conduct. So thanks for joining us, folks. We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining the HR Empowerment Podcast, brought to you by Aurora Training Advantage. We hope you've gained new insight and strategies to navigate the HR profession. We look forward to you joining us again on the HR Empowerment Podcast.